I see a wonderful mix of people from both Grace Institute and Grace Outreach. Dr. Rogo, that's our sister organization in the South Bronx. So, and I see board members, Patricia, staff, Arlette, Liz. So thank you so much for coming to listen to this wonderful, informative talk. I'm going to let Kiki introduce Dr. Rogo, but I just wanted to thank Eva, our wonderful board member, for organizing this event. It's such a community service, and even though I feel like I read as much as I can about vaccinations and COVID and what's happening, I never quite know enough. So I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot from Dr. Rogo this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Rogo, for joining us. I will go ahead and start by just sharing a little bit of background about Miss Dr. Rogo before she dives in and tells us all about the current state of the vaccine. So Dr. Tanya Rogo is a clinical assistant professor of pediatrics at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai here in New York, and she practices pediatric infectious diseases at the Bronx Care Health System, where she is an associate program manager of the pediatric residency program and a director of curriculum in their international child health and research program. She was born in Kenya and completed her undergraduate education at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and has her dual MD, MPH from Tulane. And after she completed a fellowship, Dr. Rogo spent 4 years in Rwanda as Brown University faculty for the Human Resources for Health Partnership with the Rwanda Ministry of Health. So she has received awards and many accolades. We are incredibly lucky to have her, and she is also a part of the Diversity, Access, Equity Task Force for the Pediatric Infectious Diseases Society. So thank you, Dr. Rogo, for joining us. That is quite a mouthful, but if you want to say for anybody what it is that you do in other terms, please go right ahead and then dive into your presentation whenever you're ready.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So like Kiki said, I am a doctor that specializes in infectious diseases in children. And I happen to be practicing right now in the part of the city that has had some of the highest rates of COVID. And I myself have had the COVID-19 vaccine, but I went through the process of addressing my hesitancy and my doubts around the vaccine, because just like everyone else, it just felt like the vaccine came to market very quickly. And initially we're hearing the press releases before any data had actually been published. So I understand if anyone out here is hesitant, I understand that hesitancy. I think it's a normal thing to have questions about new things that are developed. And so I'm hoping today that I can address some doubts or concerns that people may have. So the point of this is to just have a discussion, and hopefully everyone comes away with having learned some new things today. So I am going to share my screen right now. So I am going to initially present a PowerPoint, and then if you have any questions, if you can either type them in the chat or maybe wait until the end, because I planned for this part of it to just be about 30 minutes so that we can have time to talk. So starting to just review where we are in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. So as you all, I'm sure, are aware, at the end of 2019, there was a new coronavirus that was identified as a cause of a cluster of pneumonia cases in Wuhan, a city in Hubei province in China. And by February of 2020, the World Health Organization named the disease coronavirus disease 2019, or COVID-19 for short. And it's only the 6th time in the history of the naming of pandemics that we've named a pandemic. And the last one that you may recall was actually the Ebola pandemic that happened in 2014 and 2015. And by March 11th was classified as a pandemic. And if you remember, that was around the time that cities and countries around the world started to shut down. So where we are now is that we've have 123 million cases worldwide. And just as a comparison, the last pandemic, which was Ebola, only killed 11,000 people, right? And we're the way we are right now, a year into the COVID-19 pandemic, is 2.7 million people have died. And the last comparable pandemic that we had was the Spanish flu pandemic at the end of the First World War that ran for 2.5 years. And so far, we've been following the pattern of the Spanish flu pandemic, where it started initially in the spring, and then we had the cases go down in the summer, and then really hit with the vengeance in the winter time. We're following that same pattern. So if you run the 2.5 years like the Spanish flu pandemic runs, then you just need to double these numbers that I'm showing you on the screen by, 2.5. And I'm sure we don't want to have 5 million people or more dying from this disease. So in terms of where we are in New York City, we had the initial peak that happened in the spring of last year. And then as things got warm, the numbers went down, and then we start to see this climb again, starting after around Thanksgiving with everyone traveling for the holidays. And we're just now starting to see those numbers start to come down now in March. So things that we can do to prevent the spread of COVID are, of course, to stay home if you can. Social distance. The reason for social distancing is that COVID is spread by droplets, meaning that when someone talks or coughs or laughs, they produce saliva that can contain the virus. And we know that these droplets can go up to 6 feet. So therefore, the recommendation to stay 6 feet away from people. Wearing a face covering as well, washing your hands, getting yourself tested if you have symptoms. And then the last one that we're going to discuss today is talking about prevention through vaccination. So what is a vaccine? Vaccines are created to help people get immunity against infection, because the goal is to create immunologic memory such that you see a weakened version of an infected organism that stimulates your memory, your immune memory, so that if you happen to get exposed again, you have your immune cells recognize it and immediately create an immune response that, depending on the type of vaccine, will either prevent you from getting sick, or if you do get sick, prevent you from getting severely sick and dying from the illness. And vaccines have been very successful in terms of eliminating diseases that used to kill people or used to cause a large amount of morbidity. For example, we don't see polio anymore in the United States. We don't see German measles anymore in the United States. And all of these are because of successful campaigns at vaccinations. So vaccines help protect the people who get the vaccine, but also protect the people around them who cannot get vaccinated, because there'll always be pockets of people who can't get vaccinated because of medical reasons or other contraindications. And so when you have majority of people being vaccinated, it creates what's called herd immunity. So if you have someone in red here who is infected, and you have a lot of people around them who are healthy but are not vaccinated and therefore don't have immunity, they therefore are at risk for getting the infection, right? And so what happens is that most people get infected. But if you have that the healthy people are actually vaccinated, but there's someone in there who gets infected, it creates herd immunity such that the disease does not spread, but also the few people who have not been able to get vaccinated remain protected because the majority of the people around them are actually immune. So this is the concept of herd immunity. And experts tell us that in order to reach herd immunity in the United States, we need more than 80% of the population to develop immunity. So either through vaccination or through actually getting infected with COVID. And what we don't want is for the majority of the population to actually get COVID naturally. So over the last couple of months, there have been 3 vaccines that have been FDA approved, or rather received emergency use authorization by the FDA in the United States. The first one was the Pfizer vaccine in the beginning of December. And then at the end of December, Moderna got the the approval, and then Johnson & Johnson within the last couple of weeks also has been approved in the United States. So how do they work? So the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are mRNA or messenger RNA vaccines. And messenger RNA essentially is a genetic code that carries instructions to make a particular protein. And in this case, the messenger RNA carries instructions to make a spike protein, which sits on the surface of the COVID-19 virus. And so when this vaccine is injected into a person, the code is made, the spike protein is made, and then the spike protein is taken up by your immune cells, which then trigger an immune response that creates antibodies against the COVID-19 virus. And then enzymes in the body quickly degrade and dispose of the mRNA within hours, so it does not stay in your body. And so to just explain this again in picture form, you have the spike protein that sits on the surface of the coronavirus, and the mRNA encodes instructions for making this spike protein. So when they make the vaccine, they take this code and code it in the lipid coating, which then gets injected into a person. And then the code then makes the spike protein, which then your immune cells see and create antibodies and immune memory. In contrast, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine actually uses a different mechanism. So this vaccine uses a vector of adenovirus. So adenovirus is a group of viruses that usually cause respiratory infections. And in this particular case, it's adenovirus 26. And they have created a vector that cannot replicate, and it carries the code for the spike protein. And so it works in a similar way in that the code is put into the virus, which is weakened so that it cannot replicate. This is injected into the patient. And then the adenovirus, because it has the code for the protein, makes this protein that is the spike protein, which is then recognized by immune cells, which then create the antibodies. And then the virus itself, the vector rather, gets broken down, and it does not replicate because it's been genetically engineered to not replicate. So for all of the 3 vaccines, there's no live virus that's involved, and there's no genetic material that's incorporated into the person's genome. Do the vaccines themselves actually work? So the initial clinical trials for the mRNA vaccines show that for the groups, the group that got the vaccine compared to the placebo group had a decreased chance of getting sick from COVID by 94 to 95%, depending on which trial you're looking at. Now, one of the things that I've heard people say, and a lot of people have asked me about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, is that they've heard that the initial efficacy data for Johnson & Johnson was only 66%, which is compared to the 93 and 94% for the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. So yes, the preliminary data suggests that it is 66%, only 66% effective, but it's actually not less effective in terms of what we want it to do. So in terms of preventing hospitalization, the efficacy is actually 93%. And in addition, the trial data showed that for people who now were looked at 28 days after they'd gotten the vaccine, none of them were hospitalized. So this vaccine is actually very successful in making sure that people do not get severely ill and do not end up being hospitalized with COVID, which is what we want. Another question that has brought concern and makes people have doubts about the safety of the vaccine is that the feeling that this vaccines came to market very quickly, because typically it takes years for vaccines to get developed and get tested before they become FDA approved. So what happened here that these vaccines have been developed so quickly? So what happened was right at the beginning of last summer, the Trump administration created what was called Operation Warp Speed, the goal of which was to speed up the development of vaccines. And in terms of the mRNA vaccines and the vector vaccines, the mRNA vaccines are the first ones to be used in clinical practice, but the technology that uses the mRNA is not new. Similarly, the vector vaccine is not new because in fact, is an Ebola vaccine that's currently being tested and that has been used in real life scenarios with outbreaks of Ebola and has been shown to work. And so what they did in terms of getting these vaccines quickly is that they did not skip any phases. Instead, what they did was that they ran the phases in parallel. So it's usually what happens with a clinical trial is that you have the preclinical phase where the whatever you're testing gets tested in animals or mice. And then they go to phase 1 where they start with a small group of participants to just look at to see if it works and look at dosing. In phase 2, they expand to several hundred participants, and here they start to look at safety. And then in phase 3 trials, they now have thousands of participants, and they really try to get a diverse group of people in different scenarios because you want to make sure that it does work in different people of different ages, different races, and ethnicities. And after a phase 3 trial is usually when it then goes to FDA review and then comes to clinical practice, but the phase 4 continues in terms of the post-market surveillance. And so these things usually happen in sequence, which is why it usually takes years for vaccines to come to FDA approval. But what they did differently with the COVID vaccines and why it's called Operation Warp Speed is that instead of doing things in sequence, they ran the phases in parallel. So they developed the vaccine and then did each phase in parallel such that there's been no steps that have been missed in the testing of the vaccines. The next question that gets asked is how long is the immunity going to last from a vaccine? This is a question that we will still, data is still being collected. At the time that the mRNA vaccine trials were published, there were 4 months into their vaccine trials. And so we know that there's immunity for at least 4 months. And we expect that by the summer, when these trials now will be reaching a year, that we'll have more data in terms of the longer term immunity. Do the vaccines prevent transmission? That again is also still being studied. Part of the reason why we can't answer this question yet is because the initial trials were not set up to necessarily answer this question. They looked more at whether or not the vaccine prevented the people who were vaccinated from getting sick, but they didn't look to see whether or not there was any asymptomatic transmission that was going on. And so because of that, the recommendation still is that if you are vaccinated, you should continue to wear a face mask and practice social distancing for as long as the majority of the population is not vaccinated, because we don't want vaccinated people potentially acting as a vector, even though they themselves may not be getting sick. Are the vaccines safe? The short-term safety data has been good. And I say short-term safety data because remember that these vaccines have only been tested for a couple of months. That being said, if you're going to have a reaction to a vaccine, it's going to be within the first 6 weeks that you get vaccinated. So we have several months of data. And even since these vaccines were FDA approved in December, we're now in March. So we have 4 months worth of data, and it continues to support the initial idea that the vaccines are safe. They are classified as being reactogenic, meaning that in the majority of people who get these vaccines, they will have some side effects. And the reason is because it causes a really brisk immune response. And therefore, you're going to have some side effects. So the most common side effects are pain at the injection site, usually within the first 24 hours after administration, and it usually goes away by day 2 or 3 after the vaccine. Other relatively common side effects are fatigue and headache, with high fevers being less common. And usually all of these side effects will resolve within a couple of days and are usually responsive to Tylenol or ibuprofen. So in terms of other side effects that you may have seen reported on social media or in the media. So initially with mRNA vaccines, there were some concerns about it causing Bell's palsy. So Bell's palsy is when you have your facial nerve which innervates. So you have one facial nerve on each side of your face. And so with Bell's palsy, the facial nerve, it gets inflamed and swollen, causing one side of your face to droop. And there was initial reports that people who had gotten some of the mRNA vaccines that there were cases of Bell's palsy. However, in the vaccine trials, they did see Bell's palsy, but they actually saw it was not occurring often enough that they could say that it was not occurring due to chance. Because we know that Bell's palsy also naturally occurs in people who are not vaccinated. So as of right now, it's not thought that getting the vaccine puts you at a higher risk for getting Bell's palsy. Another risk that you may have heard of is getting an allergic reaction or anaphylaxis. So in the initial trials for the mRNA vaccines, they found that hypersensitivity actually occurred equally between the placebo and the vaccine groups. But after the initial distribution of the vaccines in the United Kingdom and here in the US, we saw reports of vaccine recipients experiencing anaphylaxis shortly after receiving their first dose. And they think that the most likely cause is polyethylene glycol, which is a compound used as part of the lipid coating for the vaccine, for the spike protein. In terms of the actual numbers, it's actually quite rare. So only 1 in 100,000 doses has caused an anaphylactic reaction. And this is much lower than the rate of anaphylaxis that we see with shots of penicillin, because the risk of getting an anaphylactic reaction to penicillin is actually 1 in 5,000, right? So compared to 1 in 100,000, much, much, much lower. But as a consequence, vaccine administration time now includes a 15-minute period of observation. And if you have a history of having severe allergic reactions, they will actually watch you for 30 minutes after you get the vaccine just to make sure that you don't have a reaction. What should you do if you do get side effects? So if you have side effects that concern you, that don't go away after a few days, or if the redness or soreness at the shot site increases after 24 hours, contact your healthcare provider. And you can also just take over-the-counter Tylenol or Advil to relieve any pain or discomfort. In terms of the long-term safety data, that's not known now, and we will get more data this summer once we're a year out from the initial start of the vaccine trials. All vaccines in the United States are monitored through the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is a program that was created to detect any potential safety problems of any licensed vaccine and has been in operation since 1990. And so the way VAERS works is that if you have anything happen within a few weeks of getting a vaccine, right? So whether you faint or you have a heart attack, anything at all, it gets reported to the VAERS system, and then they analyze the signals to see if there's any possible association with a vaccine. And it has been successful in the past with pulling vaccines for which there were safety concerns. Is there any contraindication to getting vaccinated? As of right now, the only absolute contraindication is having a known allergy or a known hypersensitivity to the vaccine component. Or if you did have anaphylaxis to the first dose, that you should not receive the second dose if you're getting a 2-dose vaccine. Also, if anyone has received a monoclonal antibody therapy for COVID-19, they should wait 90 days before getting vaccinated, because in theory, this might decrease the efficacy of the vaccine. If you've had COVID, should you get vaccinated? The current recommendation is yes, because we don't know how long immunity lasts from natural infection. There have been cases of reinfection. And we do see that after a couple months after natural infections, that the levels of antibodies do tend to wane. But if you have a current infection, you should wait until you've completely recovered before you should get the vaccine. So why is getting vaccination so important? Why are we promoting this so heavily in public health circles? So you may have heard that there are new variants that are emerging. There's a UK variant, which is supposed to be deadlier and more easily transmitted. There's a South African variant, which it appears that some vaccines may not work against. So I know there have been issues with AstraZeneca against the South African variant, and also Moderna is currently tweaking their vaccine so that it can work against the South African variant because it's less efficacious. The variant that's all the more concerning is actually the Brazilian variant. because the Brazilian variant looks like it has evidence of immune escape, which means that it can cause reinfection, which is very concerning. And so we have a window of opportunity right now in the United States where the variants that are circulating are efficacious with the vaccine. The vaccines are efficacious against these variants. And so we want to get as many people immune as possible before these variants take hold and we lose the opportunity that we had to eliminate this pandemic, right? And so the goal is for us to reach herd immunity. So right now, who's eligible to get the vaccine in New York? If you are age 50 and older, you can get vaccinated. If you're age 16, because that's the youngest age of the Pfizer vaccine, or 18 for Johnson & Johnson and Moderna, and having an underlying health condition, which includes having moderate to severe asthma, having diabetes, having an immune compromising condition, having intellectual disability. There's a whole list of conditions that will qualify you for getting the vaccine. Healthcare workers qualify, teachers and childcare workers qualify. If you work in the food industry, whether it's in a grocery store or a restaurant, if you work for government or nonprofit and are public facing, if you're a first responder, if you work in a group home, work in the hotel industry, in public transit or correctional facility, you qualify right now. And it's expected that by May, nearly everyone who is 16 and older will qualify for a vaccine. How you can get the vaccine, you can go to vaccinefinder.nyc.gov to find vaccine site locations, or you can call the city's hotline, which is 1-877-VAX-4-NYC. And this is just a screenshot showing you what these websites look like. So vaccinefinder.nyc.gov, you just go in here and type in your address, and you can change the language, and it will show you who has available appointments, and there are links on there for you to make the appointment. Or if you want to go to some of the COVID-19 vaccine hubs that are all over the city, which are listed here, you can also go use vax4nyc.gov to make an appointment. And then, of course, we have the mass vaccination center. So Yankee Stadium, Citi Field, Javits Center. Some of these are open 24/7, but you do need an appointment to go. But the wait, I've heard, is under 2 hours once you do have an appointment. Okay, so that is my PowerPoint. So I'm going to open it up for any discussion or questions. If anyone has gotten the vaccine and wants to share their experience, I myself got vaccinated back in January. I got the Moderna vaccine, and my arm was super sore for like 2 days. And that was my first dose. And then my second dose actually didn't really have any symptoms, just very mild soreness, which is unusual because most people have more of the symptoms with the second dose. But I was fine. But I've had colleagues who've had more symptoms, more body aches, and stuff like that, but recovered within a few days.
And Patricia, I had my first shot in February and my second in March, and I just had a sore arm for the day after, just for a short period of time, but nothing else.
Any questions?
I'll throw a question in.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question being, from your knowledge, really, are there any side effects that we should be worried about or be more worried about as either mothers or women who might be getting pregnant? And the second thing is there one that's considered better? I figure someone else is asking that.
Sure. So in terms of if you're planning on getting pregnant, so glad you asked that question, because there's been myths that have been circulating in social media that I think with the mRNA vaccines that they may be a protein similar to placenta protein, and so therefore if you get vaccinated, it's going to cause infertility or future issues with pregnancies, and that is not true. So the trials themselves, so the initial vaccine trials will always exclude children and pregnant women. But during the the trials, there were women who got pregnant while they were in the trials, and they were fine. So they carried their pregnancy successfully, and there were no issues. So therefore, we do know kind of secondhand that it's safe to get vaccinated while you're pregnant. And right now, the trials are enrolling pregnant women. So we'll have more data on that. And then in terms of breastfeeding, there is no contraindication to getting vaccinated when you're breastfeeding with these vaccines. The only vaccines that we typically tell women who are breastfeeding not to get are live vaccines. So like yellow fever vaccine is a live vaccine. We tell women not to do that while they're breastfeeding. But these COVID vaccines are not live vaccines, so there's no contraindication. Also, one of the things, I was just reading a study actually the other day that looked at antibody levels in babies born to women who've been vaccinated and women who are breastfeeding, and they found antibody levels in the babies. And so one of the reasons why when you're pregnant that your doctor checks for certain antibody levels against measles, for example, is that we want to make sure that you're immune, because the mother transfers her antibodies to her baby in the 3rd trimester, which keeps her baby safe until the baby's old enough to get vaccinated. So it's actually good news for us to learn that women who are vaccinated and get pregnant and breastfeed are able to transfer their COVID antibodies to their newborn. So it's actually protective for the baby. And then, can you remember what the other question was? I forgot.
Is one better?
Yes. So that's where I think people get concerned when they see the efficacy data, right? Because they hear Moderna, Pfizer, 90-something%, and then you hear AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson in the 60s. So we cannot compare the vaccines right now because we haven't had head-to-head studies. We haven't had a study where you had, different groups, and this group got Moderna, this group got Pfizer, and this one got Johnson & Johnson, and then we compared them head-to-head, right? The vaccines have been done, the trials have been done separately, and actually done in different times of the year. So one of the things about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that is actually really good is that it happened during the time when the trials were happening during the time when we had the really big surges over the holidays, and also were done in countries where these variants were starting to circulate, right? So we know that it seems that at least in real life scenarios, that at the very least, it's in the 60% in terms of preventing illness, but it's over 90% in terms of preventing you from going to the hospital, which is what we want. We want to keep people out of the hospital. So as of right now, I would say that whichever vaccine is available to you, to take that vaccine, that you're not choosing a weaker vaccine compared to the other. You may find that it's easier for you to do the 1 dose versus 2 doses. So the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are 2-dose vaccines. Pfizer, you have to wait 3 weeks between doses, and Moderna, you have to wait 4 weeks between doses. The Johnson & Johnson is just a one-shot deal. And so, you may find that it's easier in terms of, not wanting to go back for a second dose. And that might be a reason why you may choose to do the Johnson & Johnson one.
Dr. Rogo, I want to just turn your attention to one of the questions we got in the chat, which is, do you have to get tested in order to get the vaccine? And is there another type of COVID test besides the Q-tip option?
Yeah. So you do not need to get tested in order to get the vaccine. What they will do is do a questionnaire to make sure that you're not currently symptomatic, because you shouldn't get the vaccine right after getting COVID or while you have COVID. And then they'll actually also ask you if you've received any other vaccines in the last couple of weeks. So if you should not have had another vaccine at least 2 weeks before you get the COVID vaccines, because every time you get a vaccine, your body goes through an immune reaction, and we don't want you to do something when you're reacting to something else, because it can blunt the response of the second vaccine. So you're not going to get tested in order to get vaccinated. Another type of COVID test, so there are several. You may have heard that there's a saliva test, and And even the Q-tip option, there's now a nasal option. So I think the one that scares people is the original nasopharyngeal one, because it feels like it's going up in your brain. But there's now one that just goes in the inside of your nose. And then there's the saliva option. And there's actually also an antibody test that's done through blood. So it's not going to tell you if you have COVID right now, but it will tell you if you've had COVID in the recent past.
I have a question. This is
Yeah,
Donna.
sure.
First, I want to say hello to Danae. Hi, Danae. And Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, ladies. Question is, we're all going to be entering into the world of healthcare. Are we going to be mandated to take a vaccine, or is it optional?
That's an interesting question. So I will say that as of right now, there's actually no vaccine that's mandated for healthcare workers in the United States. There's stuff that's recommended, right? And so, they're going to make sure that you're immune against hepatitis B. They're going to check that you're immune against measles. And then the flu vaccine is recommended if you work in healthcare, and particularly if you work with immune compromised patients, they want you to be to get the flu vaccine every season. But most institutions give you the option that you can wear a mask throughout the flu season if you choose not to get vaccinated. I will say, as of right now, I don't see it becoming mandatory because it's not fully approved yet. So remember that it's under emergency use authorization because the clinical trials are ongoing. And the reason it has the emergency use authorization is because we're in a public health emergency. And so I don't see it becoming mandatory, if it did become mandatory, until it had completed the full trials and was actually fully FDA approved.
Laura, do you want to ask
Thank
your
you.
question?
Hi, everyone. Apologies, my camera is not working at the moment. My question is, Dr. Rogo, it's allergy season. I have
Yeah.
seasonal allergies.
Yes.
Is there any effect from when I'm ready to get the shot?
Yes.
Okay.
So having seasonal allergies is not a contraindication. If you're a person who tends to have allergic reactions, I would talk to your primary care provider or whoever your provider is about that, so that they can advise you based knowing what your history is. And even then, if you are recommended to get the vaccine, to tell the people when you go that you have a history of allergic reactions, because they're going to watch you closer.
Well, it's seasonal allergies, so I think.
Yeah, so seasonal allergies should be fine. That's not
Okay.
an issue.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Donna.
Hi, is it necessary for people who are asymptomatic to receive the vaccine?
Asymptomatic in terms of not having.
Not showing any symptoms, not or getting affected by, showing anything by getting infected by the COVID.
So the goal of vaccination is to keep you asymptomatic. So that's who we want. That's the very group that we want to get vaccinated, is the people who have not been infected, so that you don't get infected in the future. So yes, if you have remained healthy, luckily, like I don't even know how, still don't have antibodies against COVID. I don't know how that's possible with the amount of COVID patients I've taken care of and amount of coworkers that I've had get sick. Which just shows you that the masking and the social distancing, I haven't gone anywhere in a year and a half, works, right? But you are the very group that we want to get vaccinated, right?
Herd immunity.
Yes, because we want herd immunity, right? So the people who are healthy and have been lucky in that you have not been exposed to COVID, not been infected with COVID, we want you to have immunity so that if you do get exposed, you don't get sick. That's the very goal of vaccination. And that's actually the only way we're going to get out of this pandemic, because as what we're seeing is it's mutating, right? Mm-hmm. As what happens with respiratory viruses is that they can mutate. And we have this window right now of where we can get majority of the population immune before these variants take hold. The Brazilian variant, so if you pay attention to the news, Brazil had a really bad initial go of COVID. And when they've looked at antibody levels, it looks like up to 80% of the population has COVID antibodies. But this new variant is causing reinfection. So these people who've had COVID, who show that they have had antibodies, are getting sick again. right? And right now, there's been a handful of people who've been identified of having the Brazilian variant in the US. What we don't want is for it to take hold, because it's going to defeat the purpose of the work that's being done with developing the vaccine and getting it out there if we then have a variant that's going to infect you anyway, despite having immunity.
Thank you so much for doing this session.
Thank you. So for those who don't know, Eva was actually my roommate in college. That's how I ended up here. She was my college roomie.
This was really great. I feel like you did such an amazing job of like just getting to the point of like all the questions that we've had. And like, I don't think anyone's managed to explain the differences between the vaccines before. So really appreciate that. I guess one more clarifying question, and similar to kind of maybe what Donna was asking, if you have had it, but you had no symptoms, should you also get vaccinated? Because in theory, you probably, if you get sick again, also won't have symptoms again.
Yeah, so the current recommendation is that you should get vaccinated because, thinking how to explain this in non-scientific language. So there's different levels of antibodies. And the antibodies that work really well are neutralizing antibodies. And the studies are showing that you have higher levels of neutralizing antibody from vaccination than you do from natural infection. So even though you may have had the COVID in the past, we do encourage you to get vaccinated because we want you to get the additional boost of having more neutralizing antibodies.
Yeah. Makes sense. And I guess even if you think that you won't, even if you get it again, you'll be asymptomatic again, you should really do your part towards herd immunity.
Yes, and also remember that with the variants also is some of them are deadlier than some of the current ones, right? So like the UK variant we know is deadlier than the original COVID. So there's nothing to say that if you get it again, that you're going to get the same mild virus that you got before. There's several factors that go into whether or not you are asymptomatic. One is how much viral load you get exposed to, right? So if someone just happens to, sneeze and walk away and you happen to have walked in that air that they sneezed into right after them, maybe you just happen to get a small dose versus you are sharing a bed with someone with COVID and you got a super high exposure, right? So that part of it is also how much viral load you got when you got infected. Second thing that factors in is your health, right? So how healthy are you to begin with when you get COVID? If you happen to have asthma, if you happen to have diabetes, so even as a pediatrician, we know that children generally do well with COVID, but all the kids that I saw admitted were asthmatics, diabetics, or obese, right? So if you have any underlying health condition, that puts you at higher risk for more severe disease. The other thing also is that sometimes you don't even know that you have a problem until you get COVID, right? So you may think that you're healthy and you may think that you'll do okay until you get COVID, and then it uncovers the fact that maybe you have underlying heart disease that has gone undiagnosed or something else going on. And then the last point, like you said, is also about protecting the ones around you. So maybe you'll do fine, but maybe you live with your mother or your grandmother, or you happen to have a child with an immune compromising condition such that you might do fine with COVID, but if they get it, it will be bad for them.
Yeah.
Great. Kiara, do you want to go? I saw your hand first, and then Shalu and Donna.
Yeah, hi. I just have like a lot of follow-up questions from my questions before. Do you know where I can research the sites of where I can find the alternative COVID? Because I'm trying to avoid the nasal test. I just seen a lot of videos and heard a lot of horror stories, and I just don't want to take that test in particular.
So I think you just have to call. Let me just see if I can open on Google. Because I think if you go on if you go to the New York City Department of Health and you go to the testing site and you pull up the list of places, it's probably just going to require you to call the places and ask them which test they're using.
Hello, I
Okay.
hate to interrupt. Kiara, I just happened to get a COVID test this weekend. I was on my way walking my dog and I seen the mobile unit. And they gave me 2 swabs, one in each nose for 2 different tests. One was a rapid, the other one I found out today. And it didn't go all the way up. It was like, it just
Yeah,
made me cry for a minute,
yeah,
but it really was not that invasive.
yeah. I just feel like certain people that are performing it don't do the. It's like I guess it's like a specific method. Like some they just ram it up your nose and then it
And
comes
they
out
were very
bleeding.
nice where I went. I went by Cortona Park. The van's out there. I don't know when they're going to be out there again, but that's where I went. And I was in and out in like less than 60 seconds. That's how fast it was.
Yeah, I figured. I'm sorry. I'm just a scaredy cat. Since the beginning,
Yeah.
I was very, very scared of it. But it's free as well if I do an alternative, or does it cost?
No, so COVID testing is not supposed to cost you anything,
Okay.
right? So it's same thing with the vaccine because we're in a public health emergency. So I'm just going on the I'm listening to you. I'm just looking on the Department of Health site to see if I
Yeah,
can
sure.
pull up
Do
the.
you know the children supposed to, when they go to school, before they going to school, they're supposed to get shot?
So right now, children are not approved because they were not included in the initial trials. So they're currently enrolling children, but as of right now, the youngest age is age 16 because the Pfizer trial included children who included adolescents down to 16. So that's the youngest age. Moderna is 18 and Johnson & Johnson is 18. So I don't anticipate that by the time school starts in the fall that we'll have enough data yet that the FDA will have extended the approval to children.
When they start September, supposed to before September they're going to, right?
Right, but the thing is they're just enrolling children now.
Oh, they
Right,
enroll,
so
right?
yeah,
Okay,
they've just
my daughter
started.
17 will be, she's supposed to do right now?
I'm sorry?
My daughter, she will be September, 17, she's supposed to do right now?
How old is she?
Like right now she's 16. In
16.
like few months she will
Yeah.
be
So
17.
if she's 16, she qualifies if she has an underlying health condition. So if she has moderate to severe asthma, if she's diabetic, intellectual disability, there's a whole
No, she
list.
don't have this diabetic, but she has allergy from food, something. Or
So
like,
I would talk to her pediatrician and ask the pediatrician if she has a
yeah,
condition that
because
qualifies.
the doctor make decision, right?
Yes, they'll be able to tell you. Because then when she goes to, once the vaccine appointment gets made, they're going to ask her what qualifies her, right, to get the vaccine. So I anticipate that by the summer, the eligibility criteria are going to go away, right? So as the supply has increased, they increase the number of people who can get the vaccine. So probably by the summer, it's going to be open to the general public, 16 and older also. But if you want her to get it right now, I suggest speaking to your doctor, because they'll know her medical history and can tell you if she qualifies right now.
But if you say the doctor make decision, it's the doctor supposed to take blood test, and after she's supposed to see how the immune system work or how it's work.
No. So I'm going to, let me show you. So there's an eligibility list. I'm going to post it in the chat. So you can go to the New York State website here. And it goes through a questionnaire that you can answer yourself. And based on your answers, we'll tell you whether or not you're currently eligible to get the vaccine.
But you said the doctor's supposed to make decision, but I have
no. What I mean is, if in terms of your history, because I don't know what your history is, right? So if you're saying that your daughter has a history of allergies, that in itself wouldn't qualify her. But if she has a history of asthma, that would qualify her, right? So it depends on what her medical history is. And the person who's going to know that the best is the doctor taking care of her.
No, why you said that? I saw many different doctors for my kids.
Yeah.
First doctor never asked me, do I need to make shot? But the other asking, you would like to do, ask me, because it's like if something like, and why I ask you, because sometimes I did like blood test and I see it's like she has a little low like vitamin Z.
So she,
And
okay.
I supposed to do her like for cancer, like protection for adult. And I didn't do that, but the doctor told me you need to do. But I asked other different doctors. They said they give permission like 40, 30, but the doctor said the government pay until something. And why ask? Because it's supposed to. I see by myself. You're supposed to check how you have blood test, how your immune system working. It's a
No, so you don't need a blood test to get the vaccine. If I'm understanding the question.
Yeah, sometimes when you have blood test, the doctor like check if you have liver, everything good. It's a vitamin D. It's like how your blood test. They put gel, special gel to see how your body protect from outside allergy because it's like many different kind of allergy.
You're talking about allergy testing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So having allergies right now is not a qualifying reason.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do we want to move to Donna, since I know you've had your hand raised for quite some time?
I forgot one of my questions, but I'm wondering, why is it being called a vaccine if it's really still in trial?
Because it's a vaccine. That's what it does.
But it's still in trial though, right?
Yes, but it always will be in trial. So all vaccines in the United States have, if I go back to this slide, let me see, go into post-market surveillance, right? So every vaccine in the United States, they continue to collect data. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right, can everyone see my screen? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So this is where the trials are. They're in phase 3, right? So in the traditional model, they complete phase 3 and then go to FDA review, and then it gets approved. Because we are in a public health emergency, right? We're in a pandemic that's killed millions of people. The FDA has given, it's called an EUA, Emergency Use Authorization, for the vaccines after they reviewed the trial data. So they reviewed to make sure that the trial showed that the vaccines protect people against dying from COVID. And they also reviewed the safety data, and they were satisfied with the data that was presented. And so they gave emergency use authorization. Now, in the traditional model, even when a vaccine is approved, right? So whether it's a rotavirus vaccine, pneumococcal vaccine, they continue to collect data. It's called post-market surveillance, because they always want to make sure that vaccines are safe, right? So just because there are other vaccines that we have that are approved, that are called vaccines, they do continue to collect the data. That part does not go away.
All right. And if it does actually gives immunity, why are we still asked to wear masks if you're immune after?
Because it doesn't stop it from spreading. And right now, majority of the population is not immune.
So that means you're not really immune to it.
No, so immunity, the immunity is to stop you from getting sick. It's not to stop you from getting infected, right? The point of immunity is that if you are infected with a pathogen, you're not going to get sick and die. That's why we want immunity, right? Because what happens is that you get infected and your immune system says, what? Oh, I've seen this before. And it runs over there to like catch the pathogen and kill it before it causes much damage. That's what we want to happen, right? So with COVID, what we want is we want most people to have that immunity so that if you do see it, you're not going to get very sick if you do get sick, right? But for as long as majority of the population is not immune just because I'm vaccinated and I walk in a room of people who are not vaccinated, right? If I'm vaccinated and I walk in there and I happen to be carrying the virus in my nose because I'm asymptomatic, but I'm not getting sick because I'm vaccinated. I walk in the room, the rest of you have not had the vaccine, and I sneeze on you, you're exposed, right? And you can get sick. So that's why the recommendation is right now. So even though I'm vaccinated, for as long as the majority of the population is not vaccinated, I should continue wearing my mask, such that if I do happen to be asymptomatic, if I do happen to be infected, but I'm not showing symptoms, I'm not going to be a vector walking around potentially exposing people. I think it was last week, the CDC released updated guidelines for vaccinated people. And they said for vaccinated people, you may start to mix in small groups of same family members who are vaccinated, right? So we're starting to see now this window opening where they're saying, okay, if you're vaccinated, these are the things that you can do, right? But it's as long as we are still in this place where majority of people are not vaccinated, we have to continue to be responsible, right? Where I'm responsible for me and I'm responsible for you, as we've learned, right? As we don't live in a vacuum. The things that we do affect other people. Now, if for whatever reason you do not get vaccinated, right? So it may be that you can't get vaccinated because you have maybe you have a condition that contraindicates you, or you choose not to. It is imperative that you continue to practice the mitigating things that you need to do. So wearing the mask, social distancing, right? Like that has to remain, especially if you're not vaccinated and you happen to be in a condition, you work, or you're in a situation where you just can't stay home. That definitely needs to continue.
But even for the people who were vaccinated,
yeah,
that was able to congregate together, that has not changed. The rule has not changed for them to congregate together without a mask.
Yeah. No, I can tell you as a healthcare worker, I work in, like most of the people I work with are vaccinated. We are still doing our meetings on Zoom, right? We're still not meeting and together in a room with a closed door because it's simply not a responsible thing to do. Where I'm continuing to wear my mask. I'm going to continue to wear my mask probably past the time that they tell us the pandemic is over. That's because I don't trust humans right now, but that's my own thing. But I'm fully vaccinated and I'm continuing to wear my mask. I still not going to dinners and parties with my coworkers who are vaccinated because we're still in an active pandemic situation, but also because I know that there are variants circulating in New York, right? So we know that the UK variant is in New York City right now. We know that it spreads very quickly. And we know that they're started to detect cases of the Brazilian variant, right? So maybe because of my infectious disease knowledge and what I know about virology, I know that we're still in this window of time that things can go either way. And so I don't want people to be discouraged, right? So just because you have to continue socially distancing and wearing a mask because you got vaccinated, that it makes vaccination pointless. No, it please. I'm tired. I work in a hospital where we had a mobile morgue that was sitting, like I used to walk by it every day. I'm tired. It's exhausting. We need people to stay out of the hospital, right? So if you can, please, if I've convinced you of the safety of it, if you're eligible for it, or if you have family members, if you have parents, grandparents that are eligible for it, talk to them about it, and get them vaccinated.
So, Dr. Rogo, we're really conscious of your time, and I realize it's
Sure.
6 o'clock. Do you have time for a very quick question from Donna Avalon? Or
Yeah, I have time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Christina. My question is like, you're actually putting the virus into our body so we could build up an immunity, but
A protein.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Not
A vector, yeah. So basically, it's to prevent us from, like, when we do get sick, to like going on a ventilator, like.
Correct.
Right. So, okay. All right. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more question if we have time.
Sure. Yeah.
We're not eligible yet. Is there a way to get the vaccine? We've heard that it doesn't have a long shelf life. And so once they open a pack, they have to use it that day. How do you figure out which places have extras?
You just have to guess. I've heard people do this where they head to a pharmacy, you know, like the CVS's and stuff for giving the vaccine, and they'll go at the end of the day. And if they have a vial open, they'll give it to you. Yeah. So I'm not sure how that works. But yes, that has been a strategy that has been used. But I know that because so we went down to age 50 yesterday. Was it Monday? We're on Wednesday now. I think it was Monday. And definitely by May, I foresee that everyone who's in this chat right now would be eligible to get the vaccine.
Well,
Can't wait.
I wanted to say you've really convinced Eva, clearly. We do actually want to thank Eva again. Thank you so much for setting up this wonderful Dr. Rogo for joining us. We're really appreciative of this. We will certainly put this recording on YouTube if you all want to share it with anyone who was, joined us, you think want to hear more facts. And Danae, are there any additional parting words?
May I ask one question, if I may, please?
Sure.
Okay, let's say there's 22 of us here. 21 of us got the vaccine. Now, do you think it will eventually be mandated that all people get the vaccine? Because there's a lot of people being reluctant. They're partying, they're just having a ball.
I don't have a crystal ball. So I don't know, but just from my familiarity of history of vaccination, there's very few vaccines that are mandatory. Situations where you may be required. So for travel, for example, with yellow fever vaccine is an example, right? You can't board a plane to go to a place that has yellow fever endemic if you don't don't show evidence of being vaccinated. So it's not that the vaccine is mandatory, but what they do is say you can't travel here, right? And so what I foresee maybe is that there'll be exclusionary criteria based on vaccination. So it won't be that you have to, but it may be more difficult to do certain things if you're not vaccinated, right? So maybe for businesses that really want to get open, like I don't know, a Broadway show, like spaces where you're in an enclosed space and it's really hard to social distance, they may create a vaccine or a passport. I don't know, like who knows what's going to happen in the future. I don't know. My hope is that we'll just get rid of this altogether and then we don't have to worry about this. That's what I really hope. Because the pandemics do go away, right? Even with the Spanish flu pandemic, yes, it killed millions of people, but then it goes away, right? So even if the vaccine doesn't work the way that we want, I hope not, and this runs the natural course, this will go away. So yes, but in terms of making it mandatory, I don't see that. I can see like businesses or specific industries based on what they're doing, wanting to open up and start going again, maybe requiring that people get vaccinated.
Okay, because you look at Miami, it's like, they're in another world. Like, oh, let's party.
Yeah, I don't I don't know. But everything that always crazy happens always starts with Florida man did this. I don't know what goes on in Florida.
Understand. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So for people who were affected with COVID, and what else? If you are affected with COVID already, is it necessary or recommended to get the double shot, or just one shot could do, even if it's a vaccine like Pfizer and Moderna who requires double shots?
Yeah. So because the trials, the vaccines have not been studied in such a way that you only take one and not the second dose. I don't have an answer for that because we don't have any data to, I wouldn't have anything to base that recommendation on. But what you're saying makes sense, because what you're asking is, if I already have a little bit of immunity and I just get the shot just as a booster, do I need to get the second one? So I understand what you're saying. I just don't have an answer to that because we haven't done the research on that to look and see if just getting one shot, if you're previously infected, gives you enough immune response. So I don't know the answer to that yet.
And is there any deaths with the adverse effects?
No, they have not been. So in the United States, we've had people definitely have had anaphylactic reactions, but there've not been any deaths. They have not. And so I will say, actually, it's hard for me to say this because I'm a doctor and I'm an infectious disease specialist. I know how to read data in a way that I can quickly parse out what's false and what isn't. But I realize that for people who don't work in the medical field, that's hard to do. And when you have things being blasted across social media and things make news headlines, it's hard to tell. Right now, you may have heard that AstraZeneca is having a problem. So the AstraZeneca vaccine is not in the United States. It's approved, has emergency use approval in Europe and in Africa. And AstraZeneca vaccine works the same way as Johnson & Johnson in that it uses the adenovirus vector. And what's happened with AstraZeneca is similar to what happened with the Pfizer vaccine and anaphylaxis, is that they started to give it widely and they started to have cases reported of people developing blood clots after having had the vaccine. So like, if you remember, I talked previously about the vaccine adverse effect reporting system that we have in the US, right? There's similar systems all over the world, and they function such that any adverse reaction that you have after you have a vaccine gets reported, right? So even, get a vaccine, you faint, that gets reported. Get a vaccine and you require abdominal surgery, that gets reported. Whether or not the two things are actually related is now where they have to collect the data and they have to look and see. In the AstraZeneca trial, they did not see a difference in the two groups. So people did get blood clots, but there was no difference between the two groups, the placebo group and the vaccine group, in terms of blood clots. And so I know the European Medicine Agency, which is the European version of the FDA, last week reviewed the data and came out and said that there was no association, that there's no increased risk of a blood clot if you get the vaccine. So I know that, so I used to work in Rwanda. I know in Rwanda, they're giving out the AstraZeneca vaccine. My former colleagues in Rwanda have been fine. My father actually right now is in Kenya and he got AstraZeneca vaccine. He's 67 and he's fine. And he's a doctor as well, and he's been telling people that he feels that it's safe and that what's being reported is being overblown. So I don't want you to think that I'm saying that it's not happening, but there will always be side effects with everything that you do, right? Even if you take completely natural remedies, right? Like you can have an allergic reaction to that. There's never a predictor as to what you're going to react to. And with the vaccines, they will collect the data and they will look at it and will make decisions. So AstraZeneca, I know is applied to the FDA for approval. I saw a headline this morning that the FDA was questioning some of the data that AstraZeneca was presenting. So I think again, the verdict is still out, but it's undergoing the same rigorous process. So one thing I do want to reassure everyone is, even though we are in an emergency and because of the emergency, it's been urgent to figure out ways that we can treat COVID and also figure out ways that we can prevent COVID. We are not compromising on safety, because that will defeat the purpose of doing what we're doing, right? The same rigorous eye is still being applied. The trials are being undergoing. They have to apply the same ethics, and ethics around drug trials have gotten really strict because, as we know, we've had past history of unethical things that have happened with drug trials, right? Like the Tuskegee experiments, for example, right? Or what the Nazis did with experimentation with the prisoners that they had in the camps, right? So we've had a history of unethical things being done with drug trials, which is why drug ethics have become really strict. It's actually really difficult to set up a drug trial now because things are really strict about the ethics. Any adverse thing, I work in an HIV research unit actually, so I know how strict the FDA is and how strict they are about everything. Any small thing that we report, a patient gets a cold, we report it. A patient vomits, we report it, right? And then we fill out follow-up questions about, do you think this was related to the drug that we are looking at, right? So there's a very rigorous eye that's looked at, which is why countries are being very quick to pull a vaccine, and has always been the case. The same thing happened with the first rotavirus vaccine that came out in the 90s. If you were old enough to recall, that one got pulled because there was a signal that showed that there was increased risk of intussusception. So intussusception is when your bowels kind of telescope on each other. So there was an increased risk of intussusception in the babies who got that first rotavirus vaccine. So it got pulled from the market, right? And they developed a newer, safer vaccine, and that's what we give now. So the research will continue. They'll continue to look at things, and things will get reported. And I hope, I know this is not the case, but I would hope that if you see things in the news and you have questions about it, that you have a resource to ask those questions to, but I realize that's not the case. But I definitely trust that the FDA is rigorously looking at things, and that the monitoring of adverse events, the system that's set up in the United States, is working right now.
You have time for one more question? I'll make it quick.
Yes, sure.
Okay, you forgot to mention MK Ultra and unethical things, but that was not my question. You said one of the side effects was Bell's palsy, right?
So
would that be permanent? Because I'm very vain.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it's actually, so this similar to what I was saying in terms of signal, right? So it doesn't look like there's a higher risk of getting Bell's palsy with the vaccine more than natural, as what would occur due to chance.
Okay.
And for those who have gotten the vaccine and developed Bell's palsy, it has resolved.
Okay.
It has not, none of the cases have been permanent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Oh,
I see that.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. Eva, thank you so much for helping us organize this. Dr. Rogo, thank you so much. We learned so much.
It was wonderful.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I'm happy to come back if you want me to do round 2. You know, I mean, who knows? There may be 4 or 5 new vaccines later this year. So I'm happy to come back.
We will take you up on it.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye. Farewell, everyone.
Thank you very much, doctor. Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.